Um, Today's Friday, in case you didn't notice, and it is the last session of our series that we have been running since Monday. So I'm excited about the topic today because it's dementia, and it's one of my favorite topics, mainly because my 9-to-5 job is around dementia care. So no wonder I'm excited about today. But before we start, shall we just close our eyes for a word of prayer? Father in heaven, thank you for such a wonderful week that we've had. Thank you for the insights that you've given us to be able to understand the ways in which you can help us to be able to be in charge of our well-being. And as today we're going to be covering the topic of dementia, one of the most common issues that a lot of people struggle with, one of the common issues that a lot of people sitting here at some point might struggle with in the future. Lord, may you inspire the words so that they're coming from you, and the information and knowledge as it's being accepted, it can help to change and transform lives. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. So welcome to those who are watching us online. Today, because of the amount of content I need to cover, I'm not going to go back and cover what we talked about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, but you might find that during the conversation from today, I will be signposting to some of those things, so you won't miss out as much, but I'm also very much aware of our time, and therefore I want to be able to cover everything, and I don't feel that I've shortchanged you. Not that you will know anyway, because my slides are my slides, but I want to do justice to our topic today. So I did mention to you before that I work for an organization called Opal Healthcare, and as I mentioned before, again, that my daily job is to support people living with dementia, to support people who are looking after people who are living with dementia. So I'm going to be sharing with you quite a number of things, but my aim at the end of the day is to make sure that I support you to know and share research and best practice around dementia care as a subject. Some of the learning objectives that you will be able to walk away with are as follows. Number one, we are going to define dementia. Okay, and once we define dementia, I think everything else that you knew before today will be challenged and will be very different. We're going to look at the impact on individuals. We'll talk about person-centered care as a philosophy. We'll talk about the impact of relationships, and as well as, most importantly, how can you create a dementia environment and a dementia-friendly space so that people can live well with the condition. So, starting with the definition. What is dementia? Now, I'm not going to ask you these questions, so don't panic and don't worry. But usually when I run seminars and I ask people, what do you know about dementia? People always tell me the symptoms of dementia. So they say, well, dementia is when people get angry, when people get aggressive, when people get confused, when people get... And that's fine because those are the symptoms of dementia, but that's not actually the definition of dementia. So this is what I need you to work on for our conversation today. Dementia is an umbrella term that is used to describe a series of brain conditions that results in a number of cognitive impairment issues. Okay? Let's break it down a little bit more so that we can connect with it in detail and in practice. Well, dementia is an umbrella term. And so what it just tells us is that, something is changing in the brain. And that something changing in the brain results in cognitive impairment issues. So this is the one thing that we need to note. Contrary to what everybody else believes, dementia does not cause aggressive behaviors. Why? Because it's just an umbrella term that says something is changing neurologically, chemically, or physically in the brain. If we know that dementia doesn't actually cause behaviors, it means that the way we see people living with dementia should therefore change, and the way we connect with them should change because their behavior have nothing to do with dementia because it's just an umbrella term. It also means that you can't look after someone and just say, they're living with dementia, so this is the care plan, or this is the intervention, or this is the medication that they need. Why? Because dementia is just an umbrella term. Let me give you an analogy. It's similar to me saying to you, if you meet me for the very first time and I say to you that I'm African. Now, you could have already guessed that because of my skin tone as well as my accent. But Africa has 54 countries. So you can't say that you know who I am and you know, if I had a birthday tomorrow and you were going to get me a birthday present, you couldn't actually be able to get something that connects with me by knowing that I'm African. Why? Because what if you get something from Nigeria? And I've never been in Nigeria. But you get something from Nigeria because your neighbor is from Nigeria, and therefore because your neighbor is African, I should like it as well. Would it make sense? What if you're going to make dinner, a special dinner, and then you think, okay, let me go on Dr. Google and consult, African delicacies, and therefore you actually pull up a recipe, you go and buy whatever you need to buy for that recipe, you probably even travel 2 hours to go and get it. You come back, you spend another 3 hours trying to work out how to cook it. Maybe third try, you get it right. And then I come for dinner and I'm sitting there and you are so pleased that you've actually done something special for me to make me feel included and connected because you've done something that will connect with my background and my heritage. And I'm sitting there thinking, what is this? So one of the biggest reasons why people struggle is because they don't understand what dementia is. So they make assumptions about what they think they either should do to support the person to live well or what they need to do to be able to manage the symptoms. So this is where polypharmacy starts to kick in, because we are managing an umbrella term which actually consists of a number of different specific types of dementia, which are also very different. But then we use the same medication to manage all those different types. So knowing that dementia is an umbrella term is important, because then you need to be able to ask the next question. So if someone has got dementia, thank you for letting me know, but what type of dementia do they have? Because that will then help you to start understanding the different cognitive impairment issues that the person will experience. Now, the cognitive impairment aspects, changes in how the brain functions, would then lead to disorientation. So if dementia doesn't cause changed behaviors, so notice that my language is different. I'm not saying aggression, challenging, difficult, whatever people might say. I'm saying changed behaviors, because it's a way of communicating the things that we don't understand that the person is experiencing, that they will start to actually come out as a result of their behavior. So changed behaviors would actually replace the negative language of being aggressive, challenging, and difficult. So what I'm saying is that cognitive impairment issues would lead to disorientation, and then disorientation is what you then start to see the person presenting with. And what does it look like? We know that disorientation occurs in three main aspects. And these three main aspects are the beginning or the foundation of being able to create a person-centered care or a meaningful intervention, almost similar to you asking me, so Simon, I know you come from Africa, and which part of Africa? Then I say to you, well, I come from the southern part of Africa. Then you say, okay, SADC is a region which is in the south of Africa, but there's about maybe 7 countries in SADC. So which country in particular? Then I say to you, I come from Zimbabwe. Now, Zimbabwe has got about 4 regions. So you say, which region do you come from? Then I say, Mashonaland Central. Now, Mashonaland Central has got maybe about a couple or 3 cities in it. Then you say, which city? Then I tell you that I'm from Harare, which is the capital city. Until I think there's a new capital city being built. So for now, it will be Harare. Okay? And in Harare, there's about 5 different areas. So I tell you, I'm from Harare South in an area called Hatfield in Kilwinning. Can you see the level of detail? That would actually empower you to know exactly how to connect with me in the right way. So using that example is the same thing with dementia. If you really want to understand what dementia does to someone, you need to understand these 3 elements. So let's go through them in detail. The first one is time disorientation. Why? Because the left side of our brain, just tap the left side of your brain for me. Okay, so don't copy exactly the way I'm facing you, because your left will be this side. Okay, when I'm facing you, yep, this is my left, which might be your right. So the left side of your brain, amongst many other functions, is responsible for time awareness and time orientation. So your ability to tell the context of duration and period is based on your brain, which means if I say to you, I'll be back in 5 minutes, you don't need to set an alarm for 5 minutes, because your brain will automatically tell you when actually it's been 5 minutes, is Simon back or not. If I say to you, I'll be back in half an hour, you will know what half an hour is without having to set your alarm. That's your brain functioning, automatically without you actually, getting involved, because there's a function around time awareness. When that function is altered as a result of disorientation, we know from research that 2 minutes in the world of people living with dementia in our world might be 2 hours in their context. So why is that important to know? Because, Zodwa, if I say to you, if you ask me for a cup of tea, and I say to you, I'll be back in 2 minutes, and then I come back after 2 hours, how will you be feeling? Angry? Thirsty? Anxious? Upset? Now, Zodwa is a very caring person. She's very nice. So she might be thinking, is he lost? Is he okay? Did something happen to him? But most people might actually be thinking, hold on a second, Simon. I've got things to do. I've got a program to go to. I've got kids that I need to go and follow up on. I need to make lunch. I need to do this. So your time awareness will start to drive your emotional experience depending on what it is you're waiting for. So for Zodwa, if I come back after 2 hours, Zodwa, would you be upset and start kicking things and turning the chairs upside down? Yes, you first ask what happened so that I have an opportunity to explain, and depending on my answer, you can make a decision to be upset with me, annoyed with me, or not. Okay? So there's a process that your brain will go through in relation to time and the context of what it is you are waiting for. But if that's distorted because also your ability to have a conversation and ask questions has now been limited by the fact that your brain has been affected in the parietal lobe responsible for language, it means that the ability to talk and engage is taken out of the equation, and therefore the person will react based on how they see their world. So in this case, how does the person see their world? You were late for 2 minutes, and you know it was 2 minutes, but the person living with cognitive impairment believes, because that's their reality, that it was 2 hours. So they are now upset and angry. Why? Because first of all, you are late with a cup of tea, and you've got a smile on your face as if the person should be pleased that you at least came back. So they're annoyed. Why are you late? They can't ask you why are you late. You're being disrespectful. They can't explain that to you. So they start to act and behave exactly how they feel. Now, when you give them the cup of tea, they'll turn around and maybe throw it away. Why? Because in their context, if you were walking around for 2 hours and fluffing around doing God knows what, by the time you turn up with the tea, it must be cold. So they don't want a cup of tea that is cold, but they can't articulate and explain that, but their experience is real to them, and therefore, I don't want that cup of tea. So we can walk away thinking that they asked for a cup of tea, I brought the cup of tea, they seem to be angry, unprovoked, and for no reason, but that's not correct. Now they're throwing the cup of tea away and they're refusing to drink the cup of tea, and that's because they're confused. But again, that is not correct. So when we make assumptions that dementia causes behaviors, this is where we end up. We miss the opportunity to understand the context of time. So it also means that if the person is looking for the toilet and it takes them 5 minutes to find the toilet, because wherever they are, they can't work out where the toilet is. 5 minutes is 5 hours. Can you imagine when you're driving on the motorway and you see the next the next services are in 64 kilometers. So you manage to hold your bladder and control it, and you see 500 meters to the fuel station. Have you ever noticed that as you pull in to the fuel station, everything changes? You start to feel pain you can't hold anymore. And, it's the urgency is so real that you almost actually have an accident. So you go in and you ask for the key, and then the fuel attendant says to you, you need to wait for the queue. And then, no, I don't want to buy fuel. I just need the key to the toilet. Now, your behavior will start to change no matter how patient you normally are, but your emotional reaction and response to the situation will start to enhance differently because of the pressure that you feel. That's exactly how someone experiences their continence needs when they ring the buzzer in a care home. Can I please go to the toilet? And they're told, I'll be back in 5 minutes. So that's 5 hours, and therefore, meanwhile, they take things into their own hands. So they stand up, trying to look for the toilet, and then their gait is not great, so they end up falling. So everyone starts to treat the fall. They start to put bed sensors. They start to put extra monitoring. They start to keep telling the person, please sit down, please sit down, please sit down every time that they get up. So the person gets angry and annoyed and upset because when you get to the fuel station and then the fuel attendant, there are 20 people queuing to pay for fuel, and the person says, you wait in line and I won't give you the key. That's exactly the same experience, except that in the world where people assume that the behavior of anxiety and urgency and distress is caused by dementia, we start to ignore the concept and we start to prescribe medication, antipsychotics to try and manage the person's behavior. So what I'm saying is that if we understand the context of time, then maybe what we need to do is to consider how many times does the person need to go to the toilet? Are they able to actually tell us when they're looking for the toilet? When they're standing up and walking around, it's got nothing to do with their dementia. They must be looking for something. So we say instead of wandering, they are walking with purpose. When you find what the purpose is, that's how you meet their needs. Oftentimes, I get referrals where people say, Simon, the person is aggressive, they're hitting, they're punching. And I say, okay, tell me about when they get up and where they're going. When was the last time they had something to eat? When was the last time they had something to drink? When was the last time they actually went to the toilet? When was the last time they went to the garden? When was the last time they had a change of clothing? Because if 2 minutes is 2 hours, waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning, by the time you get to 10 o'clock, it almost feels as if you've been up for more than 2 days. So when the person is now wanting to go and rest, sometimes we say, no, it's time to go and play bingo. And so we wonder why the person can't concentrate during bingo. And therefore the person is labeled as disruptive and confused. Or, they are not manageable because when they get into bingo, they're upset, they're moving things around, but the issue is just the context of time. When you ask someone to have a 3-course meal at the same time, for you and I, it might take us half an hour. But for someone, half an hour actually feels as if they've been eating their breakfast for what feels like the whole day. Now, some of us might enjoy eating, breakfast for the whole day, but most people won't actually enjoy that. So your appetite then changes, your concentration changes, it's not interesting anymore. You want to do something else different. So when the person stands up and wants to leave the dining room, then they're told, please sit down, keep eating, and that annoys them. Except that because of short-term memory, they forget what you say to them. They don't forget how you made them feel. So every time when you say, let's go to the dining room, then that becomes a trigger of something terrible always happens there. I don't know what it is, and therefore they start to become anxious and preparing for something terrible to happen. So you start to see a pattern of behavior associated with eating. And as the person is not taking enough calorific intake over 24 hours, they start to lose weight. As they start to lose weight, then usually people then say, oh, let's go to the GP and the dietitian and let's get some supplements prescribed. Are they actually going to address the issue? No, they're not. They're only going to cause more issues. So again, understanding time orientation is the beginning of being able to consider what could you do differently if you're living with someone who's starting to have short-term memory loss that might be indicating that something is changing in their brain that might be leading to dementia. Now, the other thing about time is that people lose the context of duration. And how it goes about is that the person might be 80 years old, But with memory loss, they go back or they regress to a different time frame or a time period whereby, yes, they're 8 years old in their actual age, but they cannot remember anything from the age of 20. So their new cognitive age is now 20. So, how many of us are 20 years old? None of us, right? Marty, if I say to you, if you tell me that your birthday is tomorrow, and I say to you, hey mate, and I give you a card that says, happy 60th birthday, what would you say? Yep, you say it's a joke. So you come and say, Simon, you know it's not my 60th birthday. And I say, no, it is. And then you speak to your wife, lovely Christina, and she says, oh, dear husband, happy 60th birthday. Then you speak to your mom, and she says, happy 60th birthday, son. And everyone else around you starts to give you cards that say, happy 60th birthday. How are you likely to take it? Okay? You think that everybody's Lulu or they're playing a game, and at some point you'll wake up and that game will be ended and you'll go back to normal. But what if from that point onwards everyone refers to you as a 60-year-old? Then you start to either become paranoid that someone is trying to do something and is misleading you, and therefore you start to become uncomfortable. And therefore, you don't feel safe with the people around you, and the way you see your world starts to change. Same thing when people lose orientation due to period, and they actually believe they're 20 years old. It means when they wake up in the morning, sometimes you'll hear them saying to you, where's my motorcycle? And you're thinking, Dad, you've not had a motorcycle for 50 years. What are you talking about? Then the fight starts. What are you talking about? I've got a motorcycle. It must be in the garage. I want to go to the garage. And you're thinking, no, Dad, you don't have a motorcycle. Then you go to the GP and say, can we get some dementia medication? But the issue is understanding that the person's duration and the person's period might be altered due to time disorientation. So what you need to find out is, what is the cognitive age of the person? Sometimes people will say, you ask them, when were you born? 1963. What year is it today? 2024. How old are you? 19. It doesn't make sense to you, but to them it makes sense because they know when they were born, they know the year today because you keep talking about it all the time, but their cognitive age is real to them. Sometimes you hear people saying, let's say the wife has passed away, and the person is saying, have you seen my wife? And people say, oh, your wife died 50 years ago. Then the person becomes angry and upset. Why? Because their cognitive age has changed and they're in a time frame where they actually live with their wife. So the more people keep saying, your wife died, your wife is not here, or sometimes people start to lie to the person and say, oh, she'll come in the afternoon. Why? Because they want to pacify the person. But the afternoon comes, then the evening comes, then the morrow comes. Now imagine when you go home, and your husband or your wife or your partner is going to work and they don't come back. You ring the police, you ring the neighbors, you search everywhere and they're not present. Would you go to sleep? Would you eat? Would you go for activities and have fun? So when the person stops doing all those things and their well-being starts to change, then we start giving them antidepressants, anti-anxiety medication, mood stabilizers, sleep medication, when in actual fact, that has got nothing to do with why they're starting to present with those changed behaviors. It's just to do with understanding what their cognitive age is. So for some people who can't tell you what their cognitive age is, what you need to do is just have a conversation with them and just say to them, what would you normally do on a Friday afternoon? And they'll say to you, well, I normally wait for my wife to come back from work and therefore she makes me some sandwiches. What does it tell you? Well, first of all, if the wife passed away, the guy is back in the time when he lived with his wife. Then you ask, where does she come back from? Or she works down the school. So it's actually working out, when did the wife work at a school? And therefore, that's the time period or the era in which the person is now cognitively living in. So you then find out, okay, so if your wife used to come back and make you sandwiches, would you like some sandwiches? And the person will say, yes. Most people living with cognitive impairment might not be able to tell you that they're hungry, But that's not because that they're not hungry. It's only because the parietal lobe, responsible for language as well as feelings, sometimes will not be able to articulate the connection between what the person is feeling and the difference between pain, hunger, constipation, discomfort, heartburn, and the association with eating. So what they will do is that my wife is the one that makes sandwiches. So if I find my wife, then I know she will know what I need. So when the person is asking for their wife and we say, your wife is not here anymore, we're missing the point, because the person is trying to use the point of reference to identify what it is that they need. So if you assume that the person is confused and therefore that's their dementia, you miss the point around diet. So the next thing is that people lose orientation to place, again, because your ability to geographically map where you are is based on your brain being able to remember features, structures, and positioning. So some of you go to work every day, and you know in your mind, after having a shower and you get into your car, you sit in your car and you automatically drive and you wake up in the car park. That's your brain doing it automatically. But if that feature has been affected, what you will see that is that people might actually live in the same place and wake up every morning not knowing where they are. So they're confused, they're worried, they're anxious. So the challenge comes if the person thinks they're 20 years old. And at 20 years old, so if I give my own example, when I was 20, I was back at university in England. So if I think I'm 20 years old because of time disorientation, when I wake up in my bedroom now, when I'm 41, I actually expect to be in my bedroom when I'm 20. So when I look at photos of me when I've got a beard and I look, 41, I actually think that's my dad. So in terms of orientation to place, where am I? My dad's bedroom. So if I'm a resident who thinks they are 20, and now I think because of the decoration in my bedroom, my environment, that I think I'm in my dad's bedroom, then when you take the toothbrush to help me brushing my teeth, how am I going to respond? Yep. When you take the dentures and you want to put them in my mouth, how am I going to respond? When you take the clothes from the wardrobe and you want to put them on me, how am I going to respond? When you use the flannel and you want to help me with the shower, when you want to use the cologne, when you want to use the razor and the shaver to actually shave, how am I going to respond? Because my orientation to environment will start to trigger my emotional reaction based on my new reality. So from a statistical perspective, we know that 80% of people who are looking after someone living with dementia are always hit during personal care. Why? Because when the person now actually identifies themselves as a 20-year-old who's in a dormitory and you are coming in to try and help them with personal care, they might assume that you're one of the students. And if you're one of the students and you are undressing them, what are you suggesting? Yep. That someone is getting lucky. But if they're worried about their girlfriend coming over, then that's why they're going to be. Someone is going to die if the girlfriend turns up or the wife turns up, and therefore it's not going to be them. So they start pushing you away, and yet everyone says that the person is presenting with challenging behaviors and they're resistive to personal care. So again, understanding how to decorate the person's environment based on their cognitive age is important, because if the person believes that they're in a care home and therefore they are in a hotel, what do you hear the person saying? They go to reception and they say, "Excuse me, can you please get a taxi for me to go home?" And everyone says that they're exit seeking all the time. So if you've got someone in an aged care facility or care community, you hear phone calls, your dad is always banging on the door in the afternoon and wanting to leave. Why? Because, well, he thinks he's in a hotel because the bedroom looks like a hotel and therefore not his home. And therefore now it's time to go home because I need to go to my wife and my kids. Or sometimes you take them for breakfast or for lunch or for dinner and they refuse to eat. Come on, eat your food. And then they say to you, who's going to pay for it? Or they might say, where's my purse? Or where's my wallet? Or don't worry, we'll get your wallet later. But the person is thinking, well, I want to find my wallet first before I actually eat the food, because what if I eat the food and I can't pay for it? That's going to be embarrassing, and I don't want to be in trouble. I don't want to be asked to be washing the plates and the dishes. So the person refuses, and we see that as being challenging and being difficult. So the person starts to lose weight, and we assume that maybe it's because they can't swallow. So we go to the speech path. Then we texture modify the food. Then we ask the chef to fortify the food. And if it's not working and they're still losing weight, then we go to get the dietitian to prescribe some supplements, and therefore the food-first approach is affected. So now, when in other parts of the world, people living with dementia can live up to 105, in Australia, the average length of stay in a care home is about 1,000 days. And yet in Australia, the average age of admission into care homes is only between 79 to 81 years of age. The last part of disorientation is when people are no longer able to identify faces and tell the difference between male and female. Why? Because the right side of your brain, your right hemisphere, is responsible for facial recognition. So how do you know that your partner, husband or wife, is your partner when you wake up in the morning? Well, your brain tells you. Okay, fine. They might have a distinctive smell that actually allows you to connect with them, but your brain tells you that's your partner. Your brain tells you that's your pastor. Your brain tells you that's your neighbor. You don't have to actually sit down and walk around with a portfolio of faces to try and work out who people are. Automatically, without thinking about it, that's a function. Facial recognition is a function in our brain. But when that's been distorted by disorientation, it means that sometimes someone living with dementia can see their partner and not know who that stranger is. And therefore, there's always a fight, because it's okay during the day when we interact together, but actually when it's evening time, I want to go to bed, and who are you coming into my bed? And therefore you always hear, mom and dad have been having a fight, and they're struggling, both of them are not sleeping well, and therefore their brain activity and brain function and brain health starts to deteriorate because of sleep deprivation. The solution might not actually be giving medication or sleep medication, because that's not going to change the reason why they're not sleeping. The other issue as well is that if the person is in a care home or a care community or a care facility, when the carers come into the bedroom to try and help them with personal care, the person is 20 years old, thinking they're in a hotel. They don't remember seeing those faces ever, and therefore they now believe that those team members are actually hotel attendants. Now, how many of you have been on holiday outside of this camp, somewhere where you lived in a hotel? Yeah? All right. So if you are in your hotel and you wake up in the morning and there's a knock on the door, and you open the door, and there's a young man that comes in and say, "Good morning, how are you doing? Is everything okay?" And they go and start to replenish the towels. Would that scare you? Maybe not. You'll probably be observing and watching to see what else they're going to do. But what if they knock and you say, "Please come in," and they walk in and they say, "Good morning, how are you doing?" and they pull off the covers and they want to start undressing you? How would you react and respond? You'd be terrified. Okay, would you be smiling and saying, "Oh, excuse me, is this part of the service?" Or, what I do? Would you be courteous? Would you be accommodating and considering? No, you wouldn't. Fight or flight, and therefore you'll be actually reacting and responding to your reality, which is you don't know who the person is and you don't know what they're doing, and therefore you're trying to get them away. And yet, when we don't understand that facial recognition is a feature in the brain that becomes distorted, a lot of people are being prescribed medication to manage dementia, to manage anxiety, to manage, challenging reactions, which often happen during personal care only because the carers know the person and they've worked there for 4 years. The person has lived there for 4 years, but every day when they look at the carers, they haven't got a clue who those people are. So even simple things like going in and introducing yourself. "Good morning, Simon. How are you doing? I know you used to live in Hatfield when you were 16 years old before you moved to England. And, I'm here to help you to get ready because you used to train and you trained at Thames Valley University and so forth. And therefore, I know where you can go and do your studies." Why? Because you are orientating the person to who you are. So you're not a stranger, but if you know three most important things about the person that nobody else knows, then therefore the person is likely to engage with you. Just like if you're walking down the street and someone comes over and then they hug you, you'll be like, oh, excuse me, do I know you? If you don't know them, then you want to keep your personal distance. And you want to actually find out why are you doing that? Because again, even looking at the recent events that happened, unfortunately, in the last few weeks, you can't just trust a stranger going into your personal space. But if the person calls you by name, and then they say to you, I saw you at B camp, and then even though they don't know your name, but if they can actually use some identifying details, then the way you respond and react to them is now different. Simple approach of considering those three aspects can actually improve the quality of life for people living with dementia. Why? Because dementia is not the reason why they start to become reactive, anxious, and what we might say difficult, not eating, not going to the toilet, refusing to have their personal items changed. It's because if their orientation to time and their place and their person is altered, you are doing everything else for me when I come to your dinner, but except for the fact that you're going to serve me a dish that I've never heard of before in my life. Now that we've set the foundation, what are the key factors that you need to consider? Number one, symptoms occur because of brain damage. So we call it brain atrophy. Okay, and as the brain is sort of reducing in size and capacity, therefore the ability for the different regions of the brain, which I'll show you later on, to be able to interact and communicate, that's what actually causes the disorientation to get worse. Each person is affected differently. We know that dementia is the second leading cause of death in Australia. It is the first in women and the second in men. So you need to understand that some people is the time disorientation, some people is the place, some people is person, and for some people is all three together. Symptoms will vary depending on the type of dementia that the person has, because each type of dementia will have a different etiology. You need to understand how that person is likely to be impacted. So understanding the type of dementia can then help us to be able to have strategic interventions that are specific to the experience of the individual. Dementia is progressive. There's no cure yet. You cannot stop it, but you can slow down the progress of dementia by reducing the stress and anxiety that people experience. And how do you do that? Understanding the reasons why they are seeing their world in a different way. So just to give you a quick synopsis of the different types of dementia, so that you can, if you're looking after someone with dementia, you can ask, what type of dementia do they have? Because it's not only one. And I'll go through each one in detail. Just to give you a little bit of understanding, but mixed dementia means that someone has got more than one type of dementia. So what could happen in that scenario is that maybe they've got medical and clinical comorbidities associated with high cholesterol, hypertension, and they end up having a stroke. And then the stroke would then lead into vascular dementia. Or it might be they already have Parkinson's, which develops into late Parkinsonism, and therefore also then have Alzheimer's disease. So again, a combination of different types of dementia is possible in individuals. So when I talk to you about the brain function and how disorientation occurs, this is what you need to understand also, that the brain is divided into these 6 regions. Some of the regions, we talked about them. The frontal lobe, which is the orange area at the front, it is responsible for thinking. It is responsible for behavior. It is responsible for the ability to put things in context. And therefore, if your frontal lobe is not functioning well, therefore your ability to know and actually understand, how do I respond when someone upsets me, is different. How do I respond, like Zodwa, when someone is late when they tell me that they're coming back in 2 minutes and they come back in 2 hours? So if your frontal lobe is not able to help you to articulate and actually be able to contextualize time and behavior, you will see people reacting from 0 to 100. Knowing that someone has got frontotemporal lobe dementia is also helpful, because that it means that if you're asking them, what would you like to eat? And you give them a menu, they get confused by it. So they say to you, oh, you choose. And then they forget that they told you to choose. When you bring the food, they turn around and say, that's not what I chose. No, that is. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. Yes, yes, it is. And then we say they are confused, and therefore we start to treat them as if they are confused. So just knowing that the frontal lobe is responsible for thinking, decision-making, means that maybe you take away the anxiety. Instead of asking them about the menu, you give them a plated option. Would you like white toast or brown toast? You know the difference. But for someone whose frontal lobe is affected, they might be sitting there trying to work it out. Okay, how do I choose? Okay, what do you mean? Do I choose the toaster to be white or brown, or do I choose the bread to be white or brown, or does the toaster make the bread white or brown, or do I choose? Which one are you asking me to choose? And if 2 minutes is 2 hours, the person is already anxious. And therefore, their hypothalamus is now producing cortisol and adrenaline, and therefore cortisol and adrenaline equals to stress and anxiety, which means dry mouth. So how are they going to taste their food without salivary amylase? So you start to see the person not eating and not drinking, and therefore reducing in weight, and therefore falling, having pressure ulcers and wounds and other things that might be clinically treated and considered to be part of aging, when in actual fact it's to do with just knowing the changes in the brain. There are two hormones that are very important for the frontal lobe, and we've talked about them, dopamine and serotonin. So when you are young and your well-being is not at the equilibrium state whereby you're able to trigger the production of those hormones, it means that your frontal lobe health over time starts to deteriorate slowly but surely, and therefore your risk of actually being able to start, or your risk of exposure to dementia that affects the frontal lobe becomes a reality. Other areas are to do with language. We talked about the parietal lobe. Some people who speak 2 languages will not be able to tell the difference in language form. So they want something to drink and they'll say to you, how many understood what I said? Yep, a few hands going up. Now, those who didn't understand what I said, is it fair for you to then walk away and say that I'm confused? No, it isn't. I just used a different language that you didn't understand. So for some people living with dementia who have got multiple languages, they are treated with antipsychotic medication because everyone assumes they are confused only because they can't tell that they've asked for something in Spanish. And therefore, they don't understand why you're not responding to them, because they don't realize that they've said it in Spanish and you don't understand Spanish. But to them, it makes sense. They don't understand why it doesn't make sense to you. Okay? So parietal lobe and language is important. Vision is another one which is important, because your eyes, those 2 things stuck on your face, they're not the ones that actually see. So your cone, rose, optic nerve, and so they're only instruments that actually collect light into the brain, and your occipital lobe is the one that processes the light photo motion into picture. So if your brain is affected, dehydration, chemical changes, neurological functions, then your vision also becomes altered. So some people with dementia will see their world in black and white. So they lose light reflectance values. So that means that if they're sitting in a dining room with a white tablecloth and a white plate, they can't tell that the food is in a plate. So they get angry, and therefore they don't want to eat off the table, and we prescribe them medications to try and manage weight loss. It also means that they become dehydrated because the glass is transparent, and therefore they can't actually see that it's got water. If it's got water, they can't see how full it is, and therefore they're worried about spilling it, because last time when they spilled something on the table, they were embarrassed by everyone telling them, oh, you spill things all the time, and therefore now they try and avoid. And again, dehydration, urine infection, falls, hospital admission, operation, quality of life changes, and also lifespan changes. Balance and coordination is in the brain, so dehydration will cause gait issues. Brainstem responsible for temperature. So sometimes you see people with dementia who can't articulate what they need, walking around and going places, picking up other people's clothes. And everyone says they're invasive and they're hoarding and so forth. But maybe the issue is your brain will know how to regulate your temperature based on your environment. So when you see the sun, automatically you know the day is going to be warm. But if you spend the whole day indoors, where the lux levels are 150 from table height, then how do you know when it's morning, afternoon, and evening? How do you know when it's going to be hot or cold? So the person now doesn't remember where their bedroom is. So every time they see the opportunity to actually keep something that will keep them warm later on, then they grab it. And that might be seen as a behavior. But in actual fact, understanding that temperature control is because of the brain based on exposure to outdoors, morning, afternoon, and evening, then helping the person to feel warm accordingly becomes, again, distorted. So the temporal lobe is responsible for hearing. Again, that's because our ears are not the ones that hear. If I clap my hands, noise is not generated by clapping because our world is quiet. What happens is that I'm only displacing atmospheric particles into a wave. That's why our ears are shaped like so. And therefore, the waves are channeled into the inner ear where they are converted into vibration, your vibrating disc in there, and then the vibration by the cochlea into electrical impulse. So your temporal lobe is responsible for processing what you hear. And then it connects it to remembering what it sounds like. But if you can't remember, it means that you might hear a trolley for tea going down the corridor in a care home, and you actually think that's a train. So every time at 2 o'clock when the trolley is going up and down the corridor, you think that you're at a train station. So now you're looking for your bags to catch the train because you think you're going to be late, and everyone gives you medication to say you're exit seeking and challenging, or you've got Sundance syndrome, which, by the way, has got nothing to do with dementia. So again, just understanding brain function is important. I showed a similar slide where I indicated that as your brain cells are dying, these are the changes from a physical perspective that you will see. The brain reducing in size, and also where you see those white areas, where you've got the red arrow at the bottom, this is where there used to be brain cells, and now there's nothing. So at this stage, daily experiences become a challenge. Asking for water, knowing is it morning or afternoon or evening. So if you've got Lewy body dementia, how does it come about? Well, it's protein deposits in the brain. And the type of protein is actually called alpha-synuclein. What it does is that it forms 3D shapes, and wherever those 3D shapes are, they produce toxins, and therefore the cells around die because of changes, chemical changes. And this leads to hallucination. So you start to see your world in a different way, and this is visual and audio. From a visual perspective, you might see someone wearing a shirt. You guys like my shirt? Yeah? See someone wearing a shirt, and it's got a beautiful pattern of flowers, roses, leaves, and so forth. But your ability to interpret shapes and colors is now affected, and therefore what you see being distorted creates a different alternative reality. So for someone with Lewy body dementia, they might look at my shirt and think that I've got flies on me. But if I'm the carer coming to help them to the toilet, now they can't actually tell me, get away from me because you've got flies. They start pushing me away. Or they start hitting me when I continue to persist to try and support them. Or it might be the case that the person goes to bed and they've got a beautiful duvet or a doner cover, as you call it in Australia, or a blanket, and it's got pictures of roses. They can't tell those are roses. They think those are crabs. And therefore they're scared, they're falling out of bed and running away and screaming. They can't tell you what it is, but their reality, based on their perception, alters how they see things. So we might prescribe sleeping medication and anti-anxiety medication because the person is not sleeping well, but it's got nothing to do with dementia, but everything to do with visual altered perceptions. I must as well mention that the right side of the brain is responsible for imaging and reflections. The ability to tell the difference between someone in the mirror and you standing here is based on your brain. So for most people with dementia, when they go into the bathroom, they open the bathroom door and they see their grandmother or grandfather. So they think, I can't go and use that bathroom. So they go to the next one, same thing. Next one, same thing, until they find a flower pot and urinate in it. Or they become incontinent. And therefore, we start to treat incontinence and all these other behaviors, and yet they only are associated with visual hallucination. I often talk about noise. If someone is sitting in the dining room and the TV is playing and they can't see the TV, they can't tell that the sound is coming from the TV. So if the TV is playing music, then they think they're at a concert. So they're not going to sit down and eat. If the music is talking about the war in Ukraine, and the person was in the military, then now they're not going to sit down and eat. Why? Because they're being called to service. So all these things around how they hear their world and how they see their world, it starts to create a chain reaction in behavior. So again, we talked about continence and movement, and so I'm going to go very quickly only because of time. Frontotemporal lobe dementia, or otherwise known as Pick's disease, we mentioned that it affects the front part of the brain, usually occurs at a much younger age. Why? Because I already explained to you, if you're not drinking well, if you're not sleeping well, if you're not actually in a state of well-being, then you're eroding the neural connections into your frontal lobe, and that's why Pick's disease tends to happen in a much younger age. Vascular dementia, bleeding in the brain, capillaries, capillars. We talked about these three sisters. Yes, screen time, sleep, and sugar. If you're taking too much sugar, then your capillaries and capillars become a little bit hard, and therefore it's easy for them to burst, and therefore when they burst, then bleeding then kills the cells in the area where that is occurring. So vascular dementia is almost similar to having a stroke. Parkinson's, to do with low dopamine production. When we talked about well-being, we talked about the production of dopamine and some of the things that you need to do to make sure that your brain function is maintained in a healthy state. So you also find that there's weak signals in the terminal branches where communication, chemical communication occurs. So if your brain chemical homeostatic function, 7.3 on the pH scale, is now altered because of coffee, because of sugar, because of salt, and not sleeping well, then communication where those neural cells would normally send communication at a speed of 250 kilometers an hour, now it becomes 120. So you have delayed responses, delayed function. And those delayed responses and function, again, can affect how you see things in your world. So people start to hallucinate. And the only difference in hallucination, apart from the visual with Parkinson's, is that there's also tactile hallucination. And what is that? Where there's overstimulation of other senses because of a stimuli which is not there. For example, we talked about my shirt. So you think that my shirt has got flies on it. So the person might be sitting there and they start to feel that there are flies on them. So they're taking things off and they want to undress, and everyone says that their behavior is getting worse, and therefore they have a care plan for sexual inappropriate exposure. And it's only associated with tactile hallucination. So think about if the person is wanting to take off their clothes all the time, maybe put on, instead of a shirt with a seam and a label, maybe put on a t-shirt which hasn't got a label. Maybe instead of a trousers with barcodes and other things that they can't actually, work out, maybe jogging bottoms or something that is light, that doesn't overstimulate, their senses. That could go a long way in helping the person not to present with behaviors. Now, we also know that Parkinson causes balance issues and vision issues, which result in slow movement and falls. So if you're saying to the person, let's go to the toilet, and normally they can walk, at a rate of per every minute, maybe 5 meters. In the morning before they take their medication for Parkinson's to allow movement and chemical balance, they might struggle, and therefore in 5 minutes they need to walk. They can only walk 20 meters. The more you actually let's go, the more you frustrate them, the more they get upset. They will forget what you said in the morning, but they won't forget how you made them feel. So next time when it's time to go to the toilet, they don't want, and they become incontinent, and therefore we start to treat incontinence, skin break, constipation, when in actual fact the issue is understanding movement and how you support the person to move well. Korsakoff syndrome, related to alcohol misuse over time. Thiamine levels, B1 levels drop, and therefore for that individual, they're no longer able to move as effectively, to remember things, to identify faces, and also to coordinate. So when they're sitting down in the dining room, as with Parkinson's dementia as well, when you give them a fork, a knife, and a spoon, they can't work out the difference. they can't feel very well, especially with Parkinson's dementia. So they're holding a spoon, but they can't feel they're holding it, so they can't actually coordinate to eat well. So sometimes thinking about how to change the environment and the utensils can then allow independence and the person to live better with dementia. Other forms of dementia, which I'll just highlight, are Down syndrome associated with Alzheimer's, and HIV, human immunovirus associated with infection, and chronic traumatic encephalopathy, and this is CTE, associated with brain injury. And this occurs when people are in contact sport. So people who do boxing, people who play rugby, and also new research indicating children who headbutt the ball during football, whether lessons or whatever the case is, because their brain hasn't developed well, as well as their skull hasn't actually formed well, and therefore over time their studies starting to indicate that their brain function starts to change, except that when that's not understood well, contact sport and damage neurologically can be diagnosed as hyperactivity, can be diagnosed as other things that are actually related to behaviors, when in actual fact, we're starting to see that when kids are playing contact sport, kickboxing and all sorts of things at a young age, not great for the brain. This is just to give you an indication that prevalence of Alzheimer's is much greater than other forms of dementia. And in my own experience and observations and research is because Alzheimer's progresses a little bit slowly. So people have a chance to help the person to cope and adapt much better. Whereas if Lewy body, for example, you're seeing ants on the carpet, because the carpet has got a pattern and you're scared of ants, you're always running away, you're always scared. You're seeing someone in your mirror, in the reflection, and you can't tell it's a reflection. You think that there are ghosts in your bedroom, and therefore you don't sleep well. So stress on its own can actually kill. And that might be the difference between where in Australia, people might live only 1,000 days, and in other parts of the world, where dementia care is different, they live into being centurions. So the good news is this, and I'm again covering detail very quickly. Dementia is not a normal part of aging. It's not. Contrary to what everybody else believes, it's accumulated damage over a period of time that results in, when you get to a certain age, your brain no longer being able to sustain, neurologically replace the cells that are dying, and that actually then leads to dementia. And also, if you noticed, most of the types of dementia I talked about, they are to do with protein and protein synthesis, protein binding. And therefore, if you think about what we talked about this week in particular, you can actually prevent dementia by maintaining well-being, temperance. You can prevent dementia by keeping brain health well, again, temperance. You can prevent dementia by, making sure that you actually regenerate your body and your brain, sleeping well. Some of the factors, 7% to do with education. The more education people have had, the more neural pathways and connections, and therefore brain density and longevity is much better. Talking about neuroplasticity, studies that were done in England identified that people who drive the black cabs, their brain function and also their brain mass in certain areas was much more improved, only because they have to remember and memorize 25,000 different streets. And they are absolutely amazing. Because I used to wonder, why is it if you go to any black cab, wherever you are, all you have to do is tell them the street where you're going, and they ask you which postcode and which area, and they say, okay, got it, and they just drive. So from a neuroplasticity perspective, the more you actually exercise your brain, the more you help your brain to form new connections that can actually help your function to be much better. So other areas that you might want to consider: hearing loss, brain injury, hypertension, alcohol misuse, obesity. And when we talk about alcohol, it's not just alcohol, but it's anything else that changes the chemical function of your brain. Think about, smoking, depression, 4%, social isolation, 4%, physical inactivity, 2%. And also studies were indicating that people who actually live in populated areas where you've got carbon monoxide, where you've got other things like diesel fumes, that contributes to brain function deteriorating. So again, from an Adventist perspective, the concept of moving into quieter areas where there's less pollution scientifically is connected to how well your brain will be able to sustain. So if you think about your brain dying, then the left function of the brain is responsible for speaking, reading, writing, listening, computation, as well as time orientation, and also the sequence of how things work. So if I say to you, let's go and have a shower, and you're living with dementia, the process of having a shower is equal to undressing, running the shower, going under the shower, drying, then applying cream, and therefore into new clothes. That is the normal sequence. But if your brain has got an altered sequence because they can't remember, then when you try to undress the person, they are pushing you away because they're expecting you to put cream first. It's real to them because their sequential thinking is now altered, and yet sometimes it's perceived as challenging behaviors. So work with the person and talk to them about, okay, what are we going to do? How do you normally do it? Well, let's try the way I do it, and then we'll do it your way later on. So you compromise and you engage in a different way. We've already covered the right side function around facial recognition, visual information, imaging, and so forth. And again, music is important because whilst it can create a positive aspect of reminiscence, sometimes if the person can't actually tell what the music connects to, I've got an example of a lady who moved from Germany way back in the time, came to Australia with 2 kids in the 1930s, and the husband passed away unexpectedly. So every time they played a specific type of music during activities, when everyone else is dancing, she was crying, angry, trying to turn off the music, now looking for her children. Why? Because the music took her to a different time orientation. At the time when she was stressed because she had a husband who had just died, she had 2 kids in a foreign country where she didn't actually speak English. So every time the music brought her back to that particular experience, which was stressing to her. Now, in the interest of time, I won't go into session 2 in detail, but I wanted to just highlight that how do you support people to live well with dementia? Well, think about their environment, the physical environment. If they have 7 items of things that remind them of their safe place when they were 30, put those things in the bedroom. Whether it's photos, whether it's the duvet, whether it's the cup, whether it's the lampshade, whether it's the flowers. If you redecorate the environment, you help them to connect better. Think about their social connections. If someone is 90 and you say to them, their daughter is coming to see them in the afternoon, if they think they're 20, are you telling the truth? No. Well, if it's a woman, it's easy. But imagine if I say to you, gentlemen sitting here, if you know that you've only got maybe 2 kids, and both of them are boys or men, and someone says, excuse me, sir, your daughter is waiting for you. You start to panic. You start to worry. You start to do some calculations and wondering, my daughter, who is it? What happened? And so forth. And yet again, that anxiety will be real to you and can actually create disorientation. So if your loved one or if your mom or dad can't remember who you are, don't go and say, I'm your daughter, don't you remember me? Because that actually causes more distress. But just have a conversation about what she used to do in your relationship that she enjoyed. And every time you visit, just do those things continuously. Because you can reconnect from a relationship perspective in a different way by understanding that their perspective is now different and therefore a new reality. I'm just going to give you a very quick illustration of how the environment changes. And so remember I talked about color. People who have their occipital affected, they can't see light reflectance value. This is how they might see their bathroom. So every time they go to the toilet, there's no toilet because they can't see it. Every time you say, let's go and have a shower, they can't see the towel, so they refuse. Every time you go to use the bathroom, imagine when you've just finished number 2 and there's no toilet paper. That will be their experience. When you say, let's brush our teeth, and they can't see the vanity or the sink. So how could you do it differently? Well, maybe if you think about color contrast, then they can see the toilet, they can see the rails, they can see the shower, and they can see the toilet. They can't see their wardrobe if they can't see through the door because they can't see the handle and they can't open the door. So they think their clothes have been stolen. So when you say, let's change you into new clothes, they don't know whether you're the one stealing the clothes or not, so they refuse. That's the dining setup. To the left, monochromatic vision. So yes, I can't see that my food is actually in a plate. I can't see the napkin. I can't see the difference between the fork and the knife. I can't see that, there's salt and pepper. I can't see that there's water. And so that's quite stressful, especially if 2 minutes is 2 hours. On the right-hand side, you help me, if I'm living with dementia, to live better without distress. Noise is another issue which we need to be aware of. And finally, these are the things you need to take away. Understand the person's cognitive age. Understand and create a familiar environment associated with the cognitive age. If someone thinks they're 20 and they used to be a plumber, they walk away breaking all the taps, don't ask for medication because they're breaking things down. Give them something to do with plumbing somewhere in a controlled environment, because that will actually help them to live much better. Think about their bedtime. If you're putting them to bed at 4 o'clock and 2 minutes is 2 hours, by 10 o'clock, they think they've already spent the night, so you start giving them sleeping medication. And finally, adapt the environment accordingly. If they can't see the toilet, if they can't see their plates, change those things, and therefore you change the way they see their world. So thank you very much for your sort of resilience. I've been going very fast because there's so much information that can help us to change the experience of people living with dementia. And this is what I want you to remember. Dementia does not cause changed behaviors. Therefore, living with dementia is not hard. What is hard is when people around us don't understand what it's like having dementia. If you understand those three elements, time, place, and person, and you are willing to move off beyond your assumptions into understanding disorientation, then people can live a lot longer in Australia, like in other parts of the world, without 50 medications in 24 hours just to manage behavior, and yet none of those medications have anything to do with dementia. Okay? I'm going to hang around. And if anyone has got any questions, like we've always done in the week, we will do. But I want to thank you again for those who've been diligent coming Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, up to today. And we do also at OPA run dementia series that are every month. So if you want to know more information around swallowing difficulties, communication challenges, then again, go to our OPA website and you'll be able to just register for free and hear some of our